Hello and welcome to I've Never Read Discworld because I ain't read much. I'm Andy Luke.
I'm PJ Hart. I've read most of it, including this. What are we talking about this month, week,
We
year?
are we are on a kind of a part holiday. We had planned to be talking about Witches Abroad, but I have been pushing PJ for ages to talk about Mort, a big comic, which is going to be our main feature, but we're going to talk about other stuff
We're
too.
keeping it loose.
Keep keeping it chillax. How have you been, PJ?
Yeah, not too bad. Busy, which is why another reason why the podcast has become slightly more chillaxed than perhaps it has been in the past. But it's been fun. Yep, juggling a few projects, a little bit of lecturing. Some things I can't really talk about yet, which is unfortunate. But hopefully, might have an exciting project to announce next month.
Start
But
your
yeah,
drum roll.
I know, yeah. Now that I've said that, I've jinxed it, and it probably won't happen. So, yeah, you can hold me to that. Check back in if you don't hear anything. So, yeah, the more,
Unless we're developing counter jinx technology.
yeah, it's like
Attention.
it feels like some headology there to be employed, perhaps. You get granny weatherwax on the case. So, yeah, shouldn't really complain. Got some exciting things in the pipeline, but it's keeping me quite busy. So, being able to flip through a comic, talk about that instead of a big, hefty, full fat novel, I think is quite welcome.
It's nice. Yeah, you've been very busy, and you said, could we maybe take a skip a week, or I don't know what's. And I kind of, yeah, I was like 40 pages through Witches Abroad. I'm still
Yeah,
40 pages through Witches Abroad. So my first instinct was to say, PJ, I'm very disappointed in you, and therefore cover my own ass,
rightly so.
or simply and elsewhere. But I shouldn't really have said that aloud because now I look like the sort of fraudster that I clearly am.
Well, I think we've both been pretty open about that over the course of the past year or so. Our audience knows who we are. They've got our number, I'm pretty sure.
I've been working on it's my Patreon, patreon.com// Andy Luke. Um, at the moment, I've got a serialized novel on there, Half Baked Alaska, which has Russian spy in it, has fishing in the Bering Sea, weird sort of offbeat comedy drama, quite epic in scale. I've also been making Always Sunny in Philadelphia review videos.
He's wrapping the t-shirt for those who aren't watching it
Repping
at
the
home.
team. Um, so I've hit upon a really unique format for reviewing. Shall we say it's quite short? I'm finding I'm really hitting a bit of a niche with that.
Awesome.
Um, so there's
And
been
you've got another audio project in the pipeline, I believe, as well. Your radio play.
oh yeah. So I'll actually be talking about this a little bit towards the end. Um, but
There you go.
the
Can we call that a teaser then, will we? We'll call that a
yeah
teaser.
yeah stay
Awesome.
with us. We're going to have more of an improv feel. Like so, usually we're quite strict about how we do this podcast. We have a
Not that you can
regular
tell, but yeah.
listeners will know. We go work through every point straight away, no preamble, and yeah,
But that's fine. We've done this book
it's
before, so we don't. I mean, so if you feel yourself really missing out on Andy's succinct little synopses that he does for every section, just go back to whatever episode we did Mort in, and
it's
you can cue them up there because they are great. I know I'm going to miss them this month for sure.
the first thing I wanted to talk about was speaking of last episodes, the other time we did an off the cuff episode like this, we were talking about the adaptations of The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic.
Oh yeah,
And you had read this, PJ, which is for our listeners, the Discworld graphic novels, published by, I think, Innovation in the early 90s, and then collected. You can get them from the Discworld Emporium.
yeah. Your version looks a lot nicer than the versions that I got from the Somaliki's school library, but yeah.
It's I hadn't read them when we were doing this. I promised to come back with some feedback. essentially good value for money. I don't know what the page count is in this, maybe 400. It's 17 quid. It's hardback. It's really
That's
beautiful.
full color as well, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. So you've got, I think Scott Rockwell is the adapter of Pratchett's books. The Color of Magic is painted by Stephen Ross, and then there's a different artist for the Light Fantastic. I think no, Stephen Ross again, actually. Scott Rockwell's script is really it manages to fit in pretty much everything. And it just reminded me, going back through how much terrain is traversed in these first two books. It is essentially a tour of the disc, a lot of parts that we haven't returned to yet.
If we ever will.
There's
No spoilers.
there's only one there's one noticeable thing that he leaves out, and that's Tryman.
Yeah.
Tryman is not in this at all. I think the villain occupying Tryman's place would have been the other, maybe the Arch Chancellor at that point.
Yeah, and I think when we looked at the TV adaptations, it was similar. Like that's where the main changes came, was to the kind of the wizard subplots. Yeah, which was interesting, and they kind of went different ways with it, I guess. But we did we talk about this last time? Did we do
You
this?
did, because I hadn't read it yet. I was
Oh
doing
yeah,
it rapid.
I can. Oh right, yeah, yeah. It's all coming back. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, I think at the time. So yeah, the Light Fantastic graphic novel. That was my first exposure to Discworld of any kind. So yeah, it is. It's seared quite deeply into my brain, and to me, yeah, reading the book and seeing the differences actually in those sections, that was quite jarring for me in a weird kind of way. And then to see that done completely different again in the TV version, it's like, yeah, it makes you sort of realize that maybe those kind of plots, especially the B plots, weren't maybe kind of weren't quite as well constructed in those days, early days of Discworld, as they are kind of in the later installments.
But it really, Rockwell's treatment really fleshed out how many good parts there are in those first two books. I know it's a very different tone, a very different pace, but
But
there's a lot
they
of
are very
great.
visual. They lend
Yeah,
themselves well because I mean we mentioned it at the time when we were doing the books that like they hop around massively, so many locations, so many set pieces. You got to feel for the artist a little bit. He never really gets to settle into any one location or any one set of characters. I feel like every few pages there's a new world to introduce, or they're like up in s- up in the sky on flying on stone, big stone tablets, and suddenly there's dragons, and it's just like relentless, I guess.
yeah, like the art was some really interesting choices, because there's a lot of these 400 pages, or maybe about 70%, are just like functional.
Mm,
They're almost plain, but it's exactly the right approach. Just shows what Terry has put down, and no more. There's not many liberties taken. I mean, there's another 30% where there's whole beautiful tapestries painted, and it's just gorgeous. So the artist can really do the job, but there's a lot of just like plain storytelling, and it works really well for this book.
yeah, I mean, if you had a splat, like I said, I guess if you had a splash page for every single like new location or for every new character, like I mean, it would be 1,500 pages long, wouldn't it?
This is very different to what we're going to talk about with Mort later in terms of style. I said Tryman was missing. I didn't really miss him at all, because I
Nah.
thought Rockwell's script flows so well. You've got your first tree time. You've got the drum, um, got the boats, and the rim, and the rock lords, and shamans, and
It's like it's so much. Like imagine getting that brief as an artist and having like it's full color, like painted pages as well, isn't it? It's like yeah, they got their money's worth out of that guy. Yeah, there you go.
yeah, it is so beautiful, and it's a top recommend for like go and buy yourself a copy of this if you haven't already, because it's just maximum value for money. It's quite a voyage in itself. Um, yeah, I think it sits very nicely along the pantheon of Discworld stuff, the certainly that I've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like what you pay for comics, it's been a while actually since I picked up a trade paperback, but for like 400 pages hard copy, less than 20 quid. Like that's a steal,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
very very rare to find in buying comics or graphic novels today. Yeah, just
Sponsor
really
us,
iconic
Discworld Emporium.
cover art there. Yes, shout out to Discworld Emporium. I
Yeah,
will send you a lovely parcel with Discworld stamps, and I
the pack
actually plan
the packaging
tomorrow
is great.
tonight my
Oh,
my last if my last one, but
oh,
it's still wet.
he's
This
been
is
back.
the
Oh,
luggage.
that's so cool. Got a luggage T-shirt, listeners. I must inform you. That's awesome. I think yeah, most people are probably going to assume that that's a Dungeons and Dragons T-shirt, aren't they? They're going to think it's a mimic. Now
But
that
you know
Dungeons and
what? I
Dragons
had
is big again.
about the second time I wore it, I had somebody come up to me and say, "It's the luggage, isn't it?"
Oh, brilliant! I'm
Like,
so
oh,
glad.
yeah.
That makes me so happy. Great. Cool. Yeah. So there is a big difference, isn't there? And it's to me maybe slightly a welcome difference between those comics and the Mort big comic. And
Graham Higgins' artwork is much more stylized. It's much more so. Um, I mean, we will get into it here, but Higgins is working fairly mainstream stuff, but his art has a real sensibility of this sort of punchy, punky British cartooning of the day. It's very caricatured. It's very jubilant. If you think of the stuff Knockabout comics were putting out.
for me, not having that kind of grounded in the industry, I suppose, and like I read The Light Fantastic and the Mort big comic in relatively quick succession when I was a kid, and definitely engaged more with the art style of Mort. And I'm not like a big comics art aficionado. Like when I buy comics, I buy them based on who wrote them. Like never mind, I couldn't even name five comic artists maybe off the top of my head, except for like the really really big ones. But yeah, something about the way the characters are drawn in this, I think they're just like there's a bit more innate humor in them, maybe. Like that's an interesting way you put it. Like, that kind of British comic caricature sort of style. Whereas I felt like The Light Fantastic was trying to be like this big high fantasy comic book, which it is, obviously, but that can kind of get in the way of the jokes a little bit. Whereas in Mort, the artwork in itself is inherently funny. It adds to the humor rather than kind of getting in the way of it. So that's why I engaged with it, I think, a lot more strongly at the time.
Yeah, you had initially said you much preferred the cover of this to the covers of other Mort variations.
Yes,
And
yeah,
you've got this the bunny ears, death putting his bunny ears sign up behind Mort's head, and it is a really beautifully iconic.
it's great. Yeah, and what I like about it, because this is an early Discworld novel, and we talked at length previously about how some of the early covers don't necessarily give like a particularly good idea of like what you're in for in terms of story. And regular listeners will know that I'm all about economy of storytelling and visual storytelling, and I love that cover because it just tells you so much about the relationship between Death and Mort, but also the character journeys that they're going to go on over the course of that story. And but it's not in this like crazy over cluttered Kirby-esque kind of way. Like it's quite a clean cover. There's quite a lot of blue space on it. It's like, yeah, I think it's great.
on the interiors, I mean, we find fairly soon on that Graham Higgins has a real penchant for like crowd scenes and the sort of jubilation that he's um, illustrating really comes to light when Death takes Mort for a curry and
I mean, even before that, even the job fair in Mort's village. Like, I love his characterization of Mort's dad, and like the way that he draws, Death's disguise, his human disguise, is like it's Guy Fawkes sort of V for Vendetta esque, with the mustache and the hat, which is cool. So yeah, I totally agree, and like his Ankh-Morpork as well. Again, feels busy and lived in, but not. But he's not overly cluttered. It's not so crazy. Like, there's not like people flying in from the side panels or anything like that, as if it was a Josh Kirby illustration. But it just feels lived in. I'm just looking at that page where they're doing the curry, and there's this barbarian sitting behind him, and then there's like I think it looks like maybe it's a member of the Watch, and the librarian is there, and just like all these kind of anybody who's familiar with Discworld just recognizes this scene immediately. But it just feels a little bit grittier. It just feels a little bit more lived in, I think, than the previous cover art. The cover art that I would have been familiar with before I picked up this comic, that I would have seen on the shelves.
the first few pages are quite starkly different to the rest of the book. There's a real black and white Chicago thing
Oh
going
yeah,
on. It actually looks, quite foreboding. If not for that sort of fun cover, you might think you were about to enter a deadly, serious, dark, grim kind of scenario.
that's a fair point. Yeah, I guess it's setting the scene of the Discworld, isn't it? And you've got yeah. So the first page it's the room full of hourglasses, isn't it? And it's not quite black and white. Like, there is a hint of color in the grains of sand. But you get the impression that, yeah, like you said, this is serious business. And then it's desaturated. It's not. I like that they haven't decided to go like fully black and white or fully grayscale when they show Death's world. It's just, yeah, it's quite desaturated, but like it's you can still see the floor is red. His face, his skull is bone colored rather than white, and there's a little bit of just like, yeah, something to it. And then by page 6 or 7 you're into a full color world, and it's not jarring. It feels like a nice transition, right?
Yeah. Um, we get the splash pages in this, which weren't so much in the Innovation Comics version adaptation. The big difference is Terry is actually scripting this
Mm.
book, which is kind of I've pluses and cons on that.
Oh yeah.
Mostly it's pluses. What surprised me straight out of the gate is that it's very leisurely pacing.
Mm.
The job fair does take several pages to get through.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fair. Yeah, like
and the
10 at
curry
least. Yeah.
scene as well. Yeah, so we don't get it's not until page 20 where we get to the the Duke employing an assassin
Mm.
at the King's banquet, which is just wonderful revelry. Saying that again, not very sort of independent British style that was going on, where people like Hunt Emerson
Mm.
coming out of the underground and getting picked up by various publishers. So this was a time in comics where it would have been, I think, just prior to the big speculator boom and the Image Comics, and to have just behind it the release of the Batman film, and suddenly there was money available to people making comics. So you had Fleetway, 2000 AD produced Crisis, a wonderful adult comic Crisis, and Revolver, and Espresso, which was the European adaptation. You had Trident Comics, edited by Martin Skidmore. They published Mark Miller's Savior, which was essentially Jonathan Ross is the Antichrist, but he's a really nice guy. You had Tundra as well, and Tundra came out of Eastman and Laird making tons of money off the Turtles and being able to set up their own publishing house. So this was a really great period of optimism for publishers. Yeah, Higgins was very sort of, his style is kind of at a crossroads of a lot of styles at that time without being derivative.
Yeah, it's not a period of, well, it's not a period of comics I would be totally familiar with, like, beyond this the kind of stuff. Like my introduction to this kind of material at this time was all through franchise stuff. So as I say, I picked up the Discworld comics at my school library. Star Wars comics, Star Wars Expanded Universe comics would have been the other kind of big thing for me. Rogue Squadron comics in particular. So like, and the Alien comics, the Dark Horse Alien comics. So like, yeah, I feel that like, even though I had exposure to that stuff, I had no idea of the context of any of it. I don't think I picked up like a Marvel, mainstream Marvel or DC comic until 10 years after this, probably till like the mid 2000s for sure. So yeah, so looking back on this, it is fond memories, and it's really interesting to kind of hear your take and your knowledge on like what the landscape was like at the time, because like it is something I've become interested in since. But like to bring it back to what you were saying about the pacing, I'm just looking at some of these early pages, like stuff that you could potentially skip over, like when Death finds the kitten drowned in the barrel. I'm glad they didn't skip it.
Yeah.
Because Death is a difficult character to empathize with, because he's a omnipotent skeleton. So to have him literally save the cat, there's screenwriting manual called Save the Cat for those that don't know, and it's all about story structure and how you empathize with characters and stuff like that. So Death does, well, he literally saves the cat, but he doesn't, because the cat's dead. But like that, Death takes the moment to fish the kitten out of the barrel, and the artwork there is great. I'm looking at it right now, and like the bag is heavy and it's dripping wet, and then you find out there's a kitten inside it, and it's horrible, but it says so much about how Death feels about living things, and that's such an important foundation for the story that he's about to go on. Yeah, they take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panels, the guts of a page on that, and I think it's time well spent. I love the way Higgins draws Death. Like, he's got so much expression, but it never feels like the bone structure changes. It never feels like the face is moving, but yet he still has a different expression in each panel. It's yeah, looking at it for the first time really with like adult eyes, I guess, and noticing that is quite a revelation.
Right. And I remember thinking in like one of Death's first appearances in this book. Oh yeah, so it's the apprentice fair, and Mort is asking, "You want an apprentice?" And Death replies, "It's my busy time." And he has his hand splayed across his chest bone, and his mouth is open up, and it's a very sort of theatrical, comedic kind of approach, and I think it just adds layers to breaking down that difficulty of Pratchett's Death as being a very traditional image of Death, or where that is in terms of visuals, in terms of graphics.
Yeah, like I'm glad we decided to do this, because that's definitely one of the biggest takeaways for me from this book, the comic version of it for sure, is how, I guess I alluded to it at the start, how the art kind of elevates the humor anyway, for sure, but it definitely elevates the characters too, I think. I mean, and absolutely not to be sleeping on his portrayal of Mort or the other characters we'll talk about, but obviously that's less of a challenge. They have eyebrows and lips and other features that you can manipulate to show their emotions, but how he does Death in this book is really, really special.
Yeah, Mort is just a stupid kid, really. And I think more likable, and certainly more more visual, more relatable. You get a better view of Mort for this collection.
Yeah, I think you his vulnerability is probably a bit closer to the surface. Like he has these big kind of wet eyes in almost every panel, certainly in the first half of the book, and he's got this horrible ginger bowl cut, and he just like it's just hard not to empathize with him. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, just having that mental image constantly reinforced, so skillfully as well. It's I think that does help with his characterization. You're right.
Isabel, particularly in her first appearance, wasn't what I expected. Higgins seems to have shorn that whole goth, dope, fat girl kind of thing for a more nuanced take on the character.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, and again, this whole kind of play of the black and white world is not fully black and white, but then she is red. Yeah, she
Yeah,
wears
she's
red, and
dressed
she's
in
got
red.
blonde hair.
And
So like,
she's a blonde too.
and yeah, I mean, she's not like portrayed as like skinny, but like there's definitely not this whole kind of running thing about her weight. Certainly doesn't feel as prominent in the comic as it did in the novel, and that's definitely to the good. I think
The
Actually,
trophy taken though by Alberto Malik, um, who just has the really sharp nose, sharp chin, just looks, it really evokes that British humor comics kind of character.
yeah, you could see him almost, somebody drawing an MP or or
Yeah.
somebody in politics with this kind of look. As I browse it again just now, I've just noticed actually that, as we said, the Death's World portrayal is parts of it are black and white, parts of it are desaturated. Mort has his like shock of ginger hair. Isabel has her red costume and her blonde hair, but manservant whose name is just escaped me, Albert. Uh, Albert is more desaturated than them. Like he's been there longer. Is that what it is, maybe? Or thinking about the reveal that's to come.
Yeah.
But like he's definitely more he like the other living characters there, the other humans, each have like a flash of color about them, and he doesn't. Which maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it feels significant. Maybe it's not.
So we get the death of the king, and again, it's a lot of crowd featured stuff. Mort taking his afternoon off, being accosted by brigands and Ankh-Morpork, going to visit Igneous Cutwell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. God, Cutwell.
yeah, who essentially just this rather large but mousy, blonde curled sort of figure with goggles on in his lab, and a bit of scally as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because like in some of the earlier pages, just the Ankh-Morpork crowd scenes, you see some wizards in the background and stuff, so you're kind of wondering, like the likes of Cutwell and those kind of more fantasy, um, traditional fantasy characters, like how are they going to be portrayed in this? Is it going to be a bit more like it was in the Light Fantastic? Is it going to be more high fantasy, or is he going to put his own spin on it? And he totally does, and I think it really works actually as well.
The main value point for us first time around was the sort of the death goes on holiday themed pieces,
Hmm.
and these seem to start much earlier in the book with Death dressing as a very respectable looking man going to a pie show, Punch and Judy show, some kind of comedy theater. They're there on page 30 out of 94 pages, I think this collection is.
Yeah, I would be interested in, and again, I bore everybody every time we do one of these about like story structure and when the act breaks are and stuff like that. But that's obviously then more or less the break into Act Two, where death we can start to really see that something's going on with death, something out of the ordinary. So certainly in terms of the pacing of the comic, that feels right. I would be interested to go back and see if there's a tweak there versus the pacing in the novel.
And this
for
is
sure.
kind of a reaction to Mort having had his day off, his day of fun, and um, that's the way it happens in the linear narrative.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
but I guess there's probably a sense that like, I mean, even hiring an apprentice at all in the first place, like, why would he do that? Why would he do that if he didn't want
yeah,
to slack off a little bit? You know, like,
and it's a question that Albert is asking
yeah,
through the book as well,
yeah.
perhaps with designs of his own.
Well, indeed, yeah, and I guess the flip side of that for Mort is that he has to go and do a bit of, I guess he has to go and take the life of a senior, well, not the life, he has to go do the business for a senior witch, and then for like whatever the Discworld equivalent of like a Dalai Lama type character is, who's going in for some reincarnation. And these are quite sweet, these bits actually. You know, you've got the old witch, and then whenever Mort swings the scythe, there's her. And this isn't in the book from what I recall, but like the version of her spirit that comes out of her body is like
Quite beautiful.
the
There's a very
yeah,
sort of human kind
it's
of
exactly yeah.
sensibility here. This old woman who transforms into this almost goddess like spirit
Yeah,
as she's
and her
released
hair is
energy.
made of flowers, and yeah, so there's something like you said, it's like something out of the Neil Gaiman page. Like you can see his version of death meeting this character
I mean,
for
this
sure.
might be what it would look like if Graham Higgins had been on Sandman. But these, like, looking
That
at
would
these
have been cool.
tasks, the three tasks, they are very, very stylized. But then the whole book is incredibly. Higgins just runs with it, just plays in the Discworld.
Yeah,
Um,
it's so cool. And similarly with like the kind of Buddhist character, and this the spirit comes out obviously looking quite different and a lot younger and more playful. And yeah, just being able to have the visual juxtaposition of that just obviously hits a little bit more immediately than I guess the description of that in the book. So yeah, I think that's something that definitely feels like a step up.
we get this recurring sort of image of a sort of crescent moon all bent out of shape and reminds me a bit of the Sandman, I think Sam Keith, Mike Gringenberg,
Hmm.
who worked on the first run of books. You've got the sort of Dalai Lama, lovely little pentagram type illustration. Um, I mean, Graham Higgins doesn't actually seem to have done a lot of work, which really surprised me.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely, because this is great. Like,
his longest run would have been on 2000 AD, and about this time, 2000 AD, he was taking a lot of choices outside of the original sort of pulpy science fiction they were known for. So this was pretty much in the wake of Alan Moore hitting 2000 AD and Grant Morrison being given a bit more reign. You'd Steve Yoel, and then of course you'd a couple of years before this you'd the release of the Judge Dredd magazine, where they were allowing much more innovative artwork. So yeah, I mean, you might well have imagined even this, if not being published through Victor Galland's or Knockabout Comics, as maybe even running in 2000 AD if there was a licensing thing.
yeah,
And
totally, yeah. I mean, it does, yeah. Especially as you say, that period of 2000 AD, you can see the kind of the crossover appeal for sure. This just when you were talking previously there about the kind of the panel construction in this section, like where he comes through the window on Binky, to save the princess's life, and it's this like it's not the sort of shot that you would usually get away with in cinema, like where it's top down, pointing backwards, and like yeah, that feels like the sort of thing that's you could have seen in a Sandman comic of that era, for sure. And where he like you got these close up panels of of this potential murder, and then this like really abstract reorienting odd angle of him coming through the window is awesome.
yeah,
And
it's a
then
very sort of Will Eisner approach to laying out a page.
yeah,
And what I took away from studying Eisner and putting into my own comics was playfulness, just keep playful, keep experimenting. If something looks fun to lay down on the page, then you do that, make that the choice of where you're going to go. As long as you've got, you can pull the reader's eye around the page in the correct thing, then by all means take chances, take experiments. That's kind of key.
Yeah, and like that page is, and I mean, all that is there, as you say, that experimentation, but it's also like quite economically told, that page. In the second panel is where he realizes that he's got Kelly's hourglass, and then, by the bottom of the page, he saved her life. So it's all happening. Like, once the story gets off and running, it is all happening, and she gets to end the page by pointing a crossbow at him, which is great as well. you know.
Yeah, it's a nice scene. There's quite a few of those sort of little iconic art moments in this. I particularly love the librarians, one or two appearances, which are just little sort of side expository kind of things. A librarian doesn't really play a role in this story, except maybe when Albert comes to university, but then he's just one professor among many. But I think it was just, yeah, he's too good a character not to find a way to put in there somehow.
Yeah, well, he takes on a bit of a surrogate narrator role. So yeah, just basically look at a couple of pages ahead from what we've just seen in terms of like what the effect of Mort saving Kelly from death is. And obviously that's just explained in the narration in the book, but in the comic we have this panel of the librarian in front of this chalkboard full of insane timey-wimey diagrams, and he says, "Ook." And then the comic book translation of that is like all the kind of science timey-wimey stuff behind it. And yeah, and again, it's like it's not even a whole page, it's just like one panel. Quite a big panel, but it's only one panel. It's just delivered really, really well.
Do you have any sort of opinion of Princess Kelly in this?
As
I
compared,
don't.
I don't, as compared to the novel, I mean, I don't think there's much to be done. Just in terms, it comes down more to how the story is presented, I think, because her lack of agency and stuff like that we touched on in the novel, and there hasn't really. It's not the sort of thing you could address through like tweaks to the artwork or whatever, in maybe the way you can address Alison's portrayal. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think she remains a bit on the back foot. But I mean, she's not portrayed badly in it by any means. But some of the things we talked about that do kind of improve the characters and the pacing of this book, I don't think Kelly is really on the receiving end of that, unfortunately. But I don't know what more could be done.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think?
I think Isabel, who
Or Isabel,
I
what was I
had
call her?
that feeling about reading the book.
Yeah.
She just seems to be a much more present character in this, a much more interesting character throughout.
Mm.
Whereas
Again,
Kevin
then
is kind of tied to the plot. And I don't know if this is the right place to mention it, but I've got a rant brewing deep inside of me, PJ.
go out for it.
Um, my biggest flaw with this book is that there's so little devoted to the main point of conflict, that there are two universes going down and Kelly is at the center of them. Um, I think we maybe get like a couple of panels where we see both universes at the same time, and it wasn't really clear. I wouldn't have known going directly into this collection what was going on, what the central conflict was. I think that probably I'm going to blame Terry for that, because just taking back a few of those splash pages where he was just stretching his legs, those could have been devoted into a better exposition of that. Um,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like, to be fair, I mean, even in the novel, like at the time, I remember thinking the pacing of that storyline was odd. I think it starts too late in the novel for sure. And yeah, like you say, I guess the opportunity was there potentially to address that in the comic, and that hasn't really been done. And I guess that maybe just shows that Terry's not too bothered about that. You know, he doesn't see the same issues of pacing in that story that we do. But certainly in terms of visual potential, yeah, like I'm looking at the page now, page 451 or whatever, where you do see that little ripple of time. But like they're like nowhere near the most memorable panels in the book. Like I mean, it's just on one side of a panel there's a tree with a poster on it. The other side of the panel, the tree's been cut down. That's not
Yeah,
that's not something that's going to be
they're
seared in the
not
back of my mind.
really big. About 10 pages before that, you get Kelly walking through Ankmore Park, or is it Ankmore Park?
I think it's her place. Still that is it? Or
So glad it is. According to the Pratchett podcast, Stolat may have come from the colonial roots of the city. Stole that. I hope
I like that.
attributed correctly there. But Kelly walking through Stolat shouting, "I command someone to notice me," when
Oh
there's
yeah.
all this traffic about them, and that's quite good. But like you say, page 51, it's very the two universes thing is very wet and low key. And when you think about how comics, particularly American comics, have handled the two universe thing before, there's so many great examples. The wonderfully iconic Flash cover with the Flash of Two Worlds.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I've recently picked up a charity shop version of a beautiful lavish hardback of Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Oh, nice.
£20. Oh my word. George Perez to die for.
At the height
Um,
of his powers, for sure. Yeah, right enough. I mean, if you want to do like multiverse stuff in comic books, like even at this point, even in 1994, you're playing with the big boys, like so.
yeah. There's so much good stuff to steal from. And yeah, I gotta say Graham's work's a bit underwhelming on that point. But anyway, let's talk about better stuff because there's a lot of it. Is that Isabel and Mort sitting in a boat on a lake talking? It's a really beautiful, quiet scene.
Oh yeah, it's meant to be. It's like their quasi date sort of moment. Yeah, there's so, there. You're. I mean, when you do look at like the characterization, you can just tell that like, as you said, Graham's more interested in that relationship in that world. You know, like the kind of yeah, just the amount of kind of imagination and character that he pours into their interactions versus yeah the Kelly stuff, the still that stuff. Yeah, it's hard to know, I guess, like how much of that is script and how much of it is the artist. But it certainly feels there's a bit more love on those pages. My One of my all-time favorite, if not my very favorite comic panel of all time is coming up, or my very, if not panel, certainly page. I'm bearing in mind that when I first read this, I could probably count the number of comics that I'd read on like one hand, certainly on two hands. But page 63 of the Mort big comic, which is Death working in the kitchen of Harga's House of Ribs.
Oh,
And
he
I'm not,
looks so good in that hat.
and I'm looking at it right now. Even that, I'm still laughing. It still makes me laugh. And do you know what it is? It's
This
just
is being
how,
washed. The expression is
yeah,
being.
it's exactly it. It's how happy he looks washing the
Yeah.
dishes because like you get to see like what a shithole this restaurant is and like the grease that's dripping off the plates that he's handing out to this like to Hargay who's this like absolute horrible beast of a man.
He looks
And
swarthy as hell.
yeah, but then like two panels later he's just having the fucking time of his life and just washing the dishes. And of
After
course,
you eat, please wash your hands.
yeah. And then because we set it up earlier, he's feeding the cats the leftover cream and everything, and he's
Oh,
just like he couldn't be happier. I just love it. It's
That
yeah.
is an adorable page. Yeah, I've got some post-production editing to do in this one.
Sorry
Um,
about that.
just over Leaf, we've got Albert dressing up in his wizard's cloak and hat and staff, and there's a real sort of,
And
you know,
interestingly,
it's
he
a
has
return to glory for this character.
yeah, and he has color now, which he didn't previously. So I do think there is a kind of conscious. He's got his yellow seems to be his color. You know, out of those characters from Death's World, he previously didn't really have one, and now he does because I guess he's retaken his previous identity of Alberto, whatever
He's
wizard
right
name was.
back in the page facing. He's right back to the Unseen University, commanding from his plinth. So yeah, it's a very.
That's an
And I
interesting
know
choice,
we've
isn't
talked
it?
about too many ingredients in this particular stew, but yeah, it's so much fun to watch.
Mm. Albert's return, where yeah, he like blows up the statue, like that doesn't even get a splash page. That's kind of like it's kind of tucked in there. So it's quite a tall panel, but like you know, as you say, that's the sort of thing that you might instinctively think is going to get a full page. You know, the dude blowing up a statue and coming back to life after 1,000 years or whatever, but it doesn't. And I wonder, is that like how do you find that affects the pacing or in a good way? Because I guess yeah, like you say, he's straight into throwing commands around and stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that's
Um,
good.
yeah, I mean, 93 pages is a really tough order for anyone to try and adapt that work.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um, and I think, to Terry's credit, there, I would imagine there have been chops made, like serious chops to serious story beats, and those have worked really well. I
I love
think,
how kind of like Sandman-esque, like Mort is starting to look at this section, you know, when you look at page 67, and then it gets really crazy, like page 68, 69, where like his mouth is, and his eyes are just these like black voids with pinpricks in them. And yeah, it is, like you say, you know, it starts to feel like that kind of 90s alt comics kind of proper spooky vibe, like, you know,
yeah,
like a Sandman or you could see this, you know, this being art, maybe being in something by Grant Morrison or whatever. It's genuinely quite creepy. Like the portrayal of him in at the bottom of page 68 is like yeah, it's unsettling.
sometimes the plot moves are a bit too swift for my liking, but
Yeah.
because it's Pratchett adapting his own work, you do get the inclusion of all the great lines, the most memorable stuff, the stuff that needs to be there to make it Mort. One of the things that I was that I think I was looking for in doing this return to Mort, because I was so hard on it initially, that I can see while having reread this, but not actually being present in this,
Mm,
was the narrative of Kelly and how it's important in death. You know, when somebody has died, to remember them and to tell their stories
mm.
and have those passed on. I think that's a really core important theme of Mort,
Yeah.
the novel. So yeah, maybe I should talked a bit more about that last time. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it is all in there and it is important for sure. But I think, as we mentioned then, and we've alluded to it again now, you know, it comes like all those ideas come in pretty late. I don't think, unless, and I'll own up to it if I have, unless I've missed significant groundwork being laid for that, especially in the first act of the book. I feel it does feel unbalanced, and maybe that's why we didn't give it the attention that it maybe deserves. There's a thing that's going on here, and again, rereading it, but rereading this while also reading Witches Abroad at the same time kind of got me thinking about it. I sort of feel that like Mort almost feels like a bit of a prototype of Reaper Man because like a lot of the same themes and even like there's similar story beats and stuff. Like he's taken this a similar kind of premise and just refined it. And like Equal Rights and Weird Sisters, or maybe even Weird Sisters and Witches Abroad, it sort of feels like there's a similar thing going on. So So yeah, obviously if this book was perfect, there wouldn't be a need to like revisit a lot of those themes in Reaperman. So I think there does have to be an acknowledgement of the fact that like this story does have some rough edges, and I think Terry probably even if he didn't acknowledge that, like why did he write this other book that like retread so much of the same ground
I
and does
think I
better
might
at it, you know.
be with you on that one. And I really enjoyed Reaper Man. Um, I think I enjoy it now even more. It's a book that resonates really well.
Agreed. Yeah, and you can definitely. I mean, I bang on about it all the time. In retrospect, through this podcast, like you can kind of you can see that refinement kind of happening through the series, and especially like now on second, and third, fourth, fifth, sixth reads of some of these books, it becomes more and more obvious. Reading them actually, basically one after the other, I guess, with very few breaks, is what's really bringing that home for me at the minute. So yeah, for this, to be looking at the story structure of Mort again here and seeing basically the same issues, even though, again, just looking at death here on page 85, like the range of emotion that he's getting into this, like he looks so vulnerable. Like, Mort, they've had their sword fight and Mort's kind of got him on the ground and he's like, then he kicks him in the nuts and like Mort's face
Was
like
that
gets
was
kicked
that
in
in
the
the
nuts.
original? I don't remember
It's
that.
Yeah, it's such an emotional roller coaster,
Uh,
and it's all in the art. So even though the art does elevate so much of this section of the book, like there's only so much it can do for the pacing overall.
the In these final so 25 pages or so, I'm noticing the color choices more and more, that there's more sort of gold and yellow coming out. This is Higgins again, on colors. The oranges. So, for example, the Egyptian pyramid, the crescent moon, Alberto's robes at the Unseen
Yeah,
University, fried eggs on the floor. Um, yeah.
I
Uh,
guess it's the more time as the book goes on. Um, yeah, this is a part of the story. We're not cutting back to Death's realm quite as much, so it just feels it's a bit more of a feast in terms of color, which is nice. I like the way that they kind of he gave Albert his own kind of motif. Mort, Mort's kind of got this sort of dark green outfit. Isabel has her red outfit, and then Albert gets his yellow outfit. And I thought that was quite a nice touch. So yeah, I can't believe he's like, Phil, he did all the pencils and all the colors and all the inks as well, I assume.
wow. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Seems so.
Maybe that's
Um,
why I didn't do that much work, 'cause it just took him forever. I mean, some of these pages are just insane, like for one person to have created.
I know we both had problems with the endings. First time around that or when we talked about this, that there were so many endings. It feels a lot more flowy this time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, and that's just this one of the strengths of the medium, I guess, isn't it? Where you can just have like you can wrap something up in a couple of panels, but that would take a couple of pages maybe in prose. But I mean, you would know better than I. These are two of the mediums that you work in the most. So,
The
but yeah,
Death Mort fight in the original felt very brutal, a bit. It was a bit upsetting for me, shall we say? And here it seems played much more for laughs or for bravado.
yeah, it helps that it like so looking at it here, like the first couple of panels of it, like Mort has this big cool black flowing cloak and he takes a swing with a sword and it looks badass, like it looks cool. And then by the time it's only like a couple of pages later that like Mort has death on the run, basically. So yeah, it felt a bit protracted in the novel, and like you said, it got a bit hardcore. Tonally, it didn't quite fit. So yeah, I mean, definitely the art, as I mentioned it already, like the expression on Death's face, and then the kick in the nuts, and then the expression on Mort's face when he gets kicked on the nuts, like that definitely helps with the tone. So yeah, so shortening it and just like throwing in some nice visuals just does a lot to kind of smooth that over, doesn't it?
The whole choreography of the sword fight on the page. It works really, really well in the visual medium. God, I love visual mediums.
Totally. Why are we reading all these books? Why do a podcast about something visual? Well, because
um,
yeah, 'cause you can't
yep,
see it.
yep. Here comes a crowdfunder.
Yeah. No, it is nice to kind of mix it up every once in a while with these. It is making me want to read the Guards one again, which I do have a copy of somewhere in this room. If anybody's watching the video, and they can tell that I live in the kind of middle of a car crash. It sort of looks like.
It's a
Um,
guards book. It's a big one.
yeah, I mean it's pretty much the same format as this.
All right.
I think it's even the same artist. I think it's still Graham.
Yeah, Graham Higgins. So that'll be a thing. I have a Graham Higgins story actually.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I met Graham Higgins very briefly. Actually, there's a local link to Graham Higgins.
Oh cool.
His thing in 2008 AD was a series called Medevac 318 about a space-based medicine person, and the writer on that was called Hilary Robinson. She worked for medical services in Bangor, County Down,
Where I
where
work.
we both have links.
Yeah.
My whole family is over there. Um, and it was a bit of a notable case. Hillary did a few different series with different artists for 2000 AD, but something happened with Medevac where she actually retained the rights, and the 2000 AD editors of the time weren't playing ball with her royalties, and I think she threatened legal action. Uh, Hello, Andy from the future here, and I just wanted to interject to clear up a few problems before they become problems. The strip in question was not Medevac 318, that's a different strip by Robinson that appeared in 2000 AD. She and Higgins worked on Zippy Careers, never reprinted by 2000 AD because Robinson made a copyright claim, possibly to do with the Couriers appearing in design prior to appearing in 2000 AD, possibly. Maybe no legal action took place as far as I'm aware. That's the main thing, that you don't actually sue me. I'm definitely not saying I'm aware of any legal action. Okay, back to the pod. So that's why you haven't seen Higgins and Robinson's reprinted. So Higgins was over in Northern Ireland to meet Hillary for a convention
Uh-huh.
that I was at. That was the it was called Unicon 89, organized by Queens. We've referred to that convention before.
Oh yeah. The one
So
where Terry was.
Terry and Graham at the same convention, 1989,
And
5 years
Andy was
before this
there.
was published.
Interesting.
So was that
Knowing what
a
we
little meeting?
Yeah, was it? And
Not
you were
really
there, yeah,
about
wow. And
collaborations.
knowing what we know about Graham, he probably took him 5 years to bake this. Pencil it and ink it and color it. Wow, that's quite the connection. So yeah, so Terry and Graham and our very own Andy Luke all in the same building at the same time, 1989.
That was a moment in time, because you had
Certainly
the
was.
Dandy editor, or was it the Beano editor, who was called Ewan Kerr, rather unfortunately,
Oh
Yuan
yeah,
Kerr,
see what
being heckled by Garth Ennis and John McRae,
haha,
both starting out in their careers. And
yeah,
you also had PJ Holden there, who is probably the hardest working guy in Northern Irish comics, and he was still
for sure.
shopping around. Garth and John had just gotten their big breaks, so there was a real hub of creator activity going down at Unicorn
Meanwhile,
89.
meanwhile, in Glengormley, I was in nursery school. Just,
Thanks.
just in case anybody was wondering, where was PJ when all this cool stuff was happening? He was playing in the sandpit, drinking his milk. That's what was going on. But yeah, that is cool. And yeah, like all those guys, big fans of all of them. Like then they're all still kicking, with the sad exception of Terry, obviously. But that's so cool. I wonder if that is kind of the source of the collaboration, because I think like for all the flaws of Mort, that we've discussed previously. Like, it's undeniable that this comic elevates this story for me, and it's the artwork and particularly the characterizations that do it. So like, that's cool. If Northern Ireland played some small part in making that happen, that is awesome.
That would be awesome. We are pretty cool here in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely.
Ignore the psychopaths. We're lovely people. We
Come see our hexagonal rocks and our Game of Thrones museum and that big boat that we built that time. I think that's it. That's all
yeah. I'm not going to rate Mort other than to say, yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was very right for the podcast, I think, as well.
Totally.
Not that of course, I love reading Terry's novels. This was a bit more leisurely. I think I got through it in like 2 or 3 days. I could have read it a lot quicker if I wanted. That was grand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find it hard not to read like a trade in one sitting. Like, I have to force myself to take my time over it. But this one is easy to do that because there's so much detail in some of the panels, and you can't help but just like take your time and find the details because there's so much, especially like in the Ankh-Morpork and the Stolat scenes. It really pays to take your time over it, which isn't something that I'm usually good at when I read comics. So I'm just scrolling back to my favorite page again. I just love it so much.
Which page is that? Oh, the Archetypes of Ribs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's making me a bit hungry though.
Congealed fat.
And we mentioned it briefly. I can't remember if it even made the edit actually when we did more. That like it still confuses me like why it's called Harga's House of Ribs, and it has recurring appearances in other Discworld books. So nobody ever goes there for ribs, and like in the artwork of Harga's House of Ribs, there's no ribs either. He's serving up what looks to be like proper English fry up. Like there's chips and bacon, sausages, fried egg. And then back in the kitchen, it's more eggs on the stove. There's no ribs. Where's the ribs?
Do you know what has become quite popular nowadays that I don't remember in the 90s? This might be a bit of a Northern Irish monocultural prejudice here, but I don't remember so many kebab shops, and kebab shops are my new go-to greasy spoon style. Now there's very little sit-in here in Northern Ireland. It's a lot of takeaway, but I'll get a chicken kebab or a kind of bite doner. Chicken kebab or chips or whatever.
Certainly some of the ones around Queens would have been there. Although some of the ones that were there in the 90s are probably not gone. Whenever they started putting, the food hygiene ratings on the door, probably spelled the end of some of those ones. I remember there was a kebab shop called Temps on Botanic Avenue beside Queen's University, and it had a DJ booth. So if you went in, if you were out Lavery's or somewhere and you went in 2 o'clock in the morning, the party would still be going in Temps. You go and order a kebab, there'd be a guy on the decks in the corner, and it would be like, the party was continued. And it's gone now. It's long gone.
My bat radar's just going off with eating at somewhere called Temps.
Yeah, which is like totally fair. But yeah, just speaking of kebab shops, like that was the road. The bottom of the Lisburn Road and Botanic Avenue were the places to go for kebabs, weren't they? It's making me hungry. Well, there you go. Yeah, that was really fun. I love revisiting that because it really was one of my first interactions with Discworld. Finding that book in the library, and that page will always make me laugh. Any excuse to pick up that book again is just a joy for me. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. So thanks for coming. Thanks for having us.
I'm really excited about getting to the next Graham Higgins, the Guards adaptation, being that Guards is right up at the top. So
yeah. Give me a few weeks to excavate it from the bomb site that is this office, and then we'll do that for sure.
Spot on. Thanks so much for sticking with us. It's just meant so much to me that you guys are here. You can find us in all the usual places, usually at the handle Discworld GNU on Twitter, Facebook, on Spotify for podcasters. We're at I've Never Read Discworld. and the same handle on YouTube, where things are starting to pick up. I've put together a number of new YouTube thumbnails. Which
The production value has skyrocketed, listeners. Check it out.
So we'll see you again in a month or so. Thanks very much.
Thanks for stopping by. We didn't do our usual have you read Discworld, but we had. You already read it before, so it doesn't count. Yeah. Okay, cool. Bye.